The year is 1230. A student sits down at a wooden bench. The room is cold. The light is bad. He opens his textbook. It's the standard astronomy text used in every university worth the name. Paris, Bologna, Oxford. He reads the first line. There is no build-up, no qualifying statement. The Earth is a sphere. It is not presented as a theory. It is not introduced as something the Church is still debating. There is no warning at the top of the page that this material might be heretical. It is a given, the first sentence. The sphere, that's it. The book is called Tractatus de Sphera Asterisk, the treatise on the sphere. The author is Johannes de Sacrobosco, John of Holywood. He is teaching at the University of Paris, and the book he wrote becomes the single most widely read astronomy text in Europe for the next 400 years. It is not a subversive underground pamphlet. It is the curriculum. Every student reads it. Every master teaches it. The copies multiply across monasteries and cathedral schools and university libraries. And every single copy opens the same way. The world is round. Let's move on. I want you to hold that image. A 13-year-old boy in a 13th century classroom reading a sentence that nobody in the room finds surprising. Not the student, not the teacher, not the bishop, not the pope. Now I want you to hold another image, the one you have probably been carrying around since grade school. Christopher Columbus stands before a council of learned men somewhere in Spain. Salamanca, the classic scene, they are priests, they are scholars, they are powerful, and they are mocking him. They tell him the earth is flat. They tell him his ships will sail off the edge of the world and fall into whatever waits below. Columbus is alone. He is the lone voice of reason. He knows the truth. They are bigots in robes. That scene is one of the most successful lies in modern history. It is not just exaggerated. It is not just simplified for children. It is fabricated, invented, written by a novelist. We will get to his name. We will get to what he did and why he did it. But first, we have to deal with the physical evidence, because this is not a debate about interpretation. This is a cold case. There is a body of evidence. There is a verdict that the public has accepted for about 200 years. And that verdict is wrong. What we are going to do here is walk through the case file. We are going to treat the Middle Ages the way a forensic investigator treats a crime scene. We are going to look at documents. We are going to look at objects. We are going to establish what was known and when it was known and who knew it. And then we are going to trace the exact moment when that knowledge was erased and replaced with a lie. Not a mistake, a lie. The first piece of evidence is the book we just opened, De Sphera Asterisk. Sacrobosco, this is Exhibit A, and already the popular story is bleeding out on the floor. Sacrobosco's textbook doesn't argue for a spherical Earth. It assumes one. Chapter 1 is titled that the Earth is a sphere. And then it lists the proofs. The proofs are not new, they are ancient. And Sacrobosco knows he is transmitting old knowledge, not inventing new knowledge. This matters, because the myth we are dealing with is built on a claim of ignorance. The claim is that medieval people didn't know what the Greeks knew, that the knowledge was lost, that the church suppressed it, that everyone stumbled around in the dark until Columbus turned on the lights. De Sphera Asterisk alone makes that claim collapse, but we are not going to stop at one textbook. We are going to build the case piece by piece. The second exhibit is older, much older, 400 years before the birth of Christ. Aristotle. Aristotle was not a medieval Christian. He was a pagan Greek, and in the 4th century before Christ, he wrote a book called On the Heavens Asterisk. In that book, he gave several arguments for why the Earth must be a sphere. None of them required a ship. None of them required a voyage. He used observation. He looked at lunar eclipses. He noticed that the shadow the Earth casts on the moon during an eclipse is always curved. He argued that only a sphere casts a curved shadow from every angle. He also pointed out that travelers who move north or south see different stars. If the Earth were flat, the same stars would be visible everywhere. They are not. He also noted that certain stars visible in Egypt are invisible in Greece. The pole star changes altitude. The horizon changes. These are not philosophical arguments. They are physical observations. They are evidence. Aristotle was not alone. A century later, Eratosthenes, the head of the Library of Alexandria, measured the Earth's circumference. He did it with a stick. He knew that on the summer solstice, at noon, the sun in scene cast no shadow. It was directly overhead. At the same moment in Alexandria, roughly 800 kilometers to the north, a stick in the ground cast a shadow at an angle of about 7 degrees. He measured the distance between the two cities. He did the geometry. His result was roughly 250,000 stadia. Depending on which state he used, that comes out to somewhere between about 39,000 and 46,000 kilometers. The actual equatorial circumference is about 40,000 kilometers. Eratosthenes got within striking distance of the true number without leaving Egypt, without a compass, without a ship, with a stick. That knowledge did not vanish. Ptolemy, in the 2nd century after Christ, wrote his asterisk geography. He used latitude and longitude. You cannot use latitude and longitude on a flat surface. The entire system assumes a sphere. Ptolemy compiled a massive coordinate list of the known world. His work was translated. It was copied. It was preserved. Now here is the pivot. Here is where the transmission chain matters. Because the myth wants you to believe that after the fall of Rome, the lights went out. The Greek texts disappeared. The church burned anything that was not in the Bible. And the spherical earth was forgotten. That is not what happened. The Greek texts were preserved and translated by Islamic scholars. Al-Farghani, Al-Battani, Ibn al-Haytham. These were not fringe figures. They were astronomers and mathematicians of the highest order. They took Ptolemy and Aristotle and they refined them. They corrected coordinates. They built observatories. They measured. And when the Latin West began to recover these texts in translation, the sphere came with them. The translators in 12th century Toledo and Sicily were not smuggling forbidden knowledge across enemy lines. They were translating standard science into Latin, and the church was funding them. Let me give you a name: Bede. The Venerable Bede, an English monk. He died in the year 735. That is early. That is deeply medieval. Bede wrote a book called On the Reckoning of Time **. It is about the calendar. It is about the cycles of the sun and the moon. And in that book, he explains that the Earth is a sphere. He draws a diagram. He says the Earth is like a ball. He says it is round on all sides. He says it is not a flat disk. This is not a controversial passage. It is an aside. It is a given. Bede is using the round Earth to explain why the length of daylight changes across the planet. He writes for monks. He writes for students. He writes for the people who will go out and teach and preach. Nobody burns his book. Nobody calls him a heretic. Bede is a saint, canonized, revered, a doctor of the church. And he taught a spherical Earth 800 years before Columbus was born. Move forward. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century, the towering theologian of the medieval church. In the asterisk Summa Theologiae asterisk, he uses the spherical Earth as an example of something that is known and settled. He is making an argument about how knowledge works. And he says, look, astronomers know the Earth is round. This is not the point he is proving. It is the example he chooses because it is so obvious. When a theologian at the height of medieval scholasticism needs an example of established truth, he reaches for the roundness of the Earth. That is not the move of a culture that is afraid of the sphere. That is the move of a culture that has already absorbed it. Let's stay in the 13th century. Dante Alighieri, the asterisk Divine Comedy asterisk. Dante writes an entire cosmology into his poem. He descends through hell. He climbs the mountain of purgatory. He ascends through the celestial spheres, and the entire structure is built on a spherical Earth. Hell is a funnel inside the Earth. At the center of the Earth, gravity reverses, and Dante and Virgil climb out the other side to see the stars. The mountain of Purgatory is on an island opposite Jerusalem in the southern hemisphere. This is not a vague metaphor. This is a specific, detailed, spherical geography. The Divine Comedy asterisk was written in vernacular Italian. It was read by the literate public. It was not a secret text for a few scholars. It was a bestseller. The medieval imagination had no trouble holding a round earth in its mind. And then there are the objects. You can still see them. The Behaim globe, made in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed. Martin Behaim, a German geographer, built a terrestrial globe. It is the oldest surviving globe in the world. It shows a spherical Earth. The Americas are not on it because news of Columbus's first voyage had not yet reached Nuremberg. But the sphere is there. The concept is physical. You can touch it. Before that, armillary spheres. These are skeletal celestial globes, rings representing the circles of the heavens. They were used for teaching astronomy. They modeled a spherical universe. They sat in classrooms. They sat in libraries. They were not hidden. Nobody smashed them. Now you may have noticed something. Every piece of evidence I have just presented comes from the educated world. Universities, monasteries, courts. This is deliberate. The myth we are dismantling is not primarily a myth about what illiterate farmers thought about the shape of the earth while they were plowing their fields. We will get to that question. It deserves an honest answer, and I will give it one. But the myth is about what medieval people, as a culture, as a civilization, supposedly believed. The myth lives in the image of the learned council at Salamanca. It lives in the idea that the official position of the medieval world was flat, that the church taught flatness, that the scholars believed flatness, that Columbus was the first thinking person in 1,000 years to look at the horizon and understand what he was seeing. The evidence destroys that. Sacrobosco, Aristotle, Eratosthenes, Ptolemy, Bede, Aquinas, Dante, the globes, the armillary spheres. The transmission chain from Greek to Arabic to Latin. This is not a trickle of obscure manuscripts found only in dusty corners. This is a wide and deep river of knowledge. It runs from the 4th century, before Christ, straight through to the 15th century after Christ. It never dries up. So if every educated medieval person knew the sphere, where did the Columbus story come from? The answer changes everything. The Columbus story you were taught never happened. It was written by a novelist. The scene is famous. Columbus stands before the council at Salamanca. The year is 1491. The learned men of Spain are arrayed against him. They scoff. They quote scripture. They insist the earth is flat. They say his ships will sail off the edge of the world. Columbus alone knows the truth. He argues for a round earth. The council rejects him. He must prove them wrong. This scene is ingrained in popular history. It is a complete fabrication, every word of it. Not one medieval chronicle records anything like it. The man who invented it died in 1859. His name was Washington Irving. In 1828, Irving published a history of the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus. It was a bestseller. It read like a novel because it was one. Irving was a writer of fiction, the man who gave us Rip Van Winkle and the legend of Sleepy Hollow. He took the bare bones of Columbus's biography and filled them with imagined drama. The council at Salamanca scene is pure invention. Irving placed a flat earth argument into the mouths of Spanish churchmen because it made a better story. A hero against ignorance, a lone genius. The truth is much less cinematic but far more damning for the myth. The real debate at Salamanca was not about the shape of the earth. It never was. Every educated person in that room knew the earth was a sphere. They had read Sacrobosco. They had studied Ptolemy. They had seen armillary spheres. The question was purely about size. Columbus claimed the westward distance to Asia was far shorter than nearly everyone else believed. He proposed a voyage across what he estimated to be roughly 2,400 nautical miles of open ocean. The actual distance, with the Americas in the way, is closer to 12,000 miles to Japan. The Spanish experts, cosmographers, and navigators correctly called his estimate wrong. The Earth, they said, was much larger than Columbus supposed. A ship could not carry enough fresh water and food to cross such an expanse. They were right. Columbus was wrong. He was rescued by a continent no one in Europe knew existed. The debate was about circumference, not shape. There was no flat Earth in that room. The myth was born in 1828, and it spread because it flattered the modern world. But Washington Irving was just the beginning. The real propaganda campaign came later. It was organized, deliberate, and it had a specific target. The target was the Middle Ages. The weapon was the flat Earth. In the second half of the 19th century, two men in particular turned Irving's literary fiction into a foundational myth of modern science. Their names were John William Draper and Andrew Dickson White. Draper was a chemist and physician. White was a university president and diplomat. Both were shaped by the intense anti-Catholicism of American Protestant culture in their day. They saw the medieval church as an enemy of reason. They wanted to tell the story of modern science as a heroic war against religious superstition. And they found the perfect story in Irving's Flat Earth Columbus, so they ran with it. In 1874, Draper published History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. In 1896, White published a history of the warfare of science with theology in Christendom. These were hugely influential books. They popularized what historians now call the conflict thesis, the idea that science and religion are inherently at war. To make their case, they assembled a gallery of villains. The Church persecuting Galileo, the Church opposing dissection, the Church burning Bruno, and at the very top of the list was the claim that the medieval Church taught a flat Earth. Draper wrote that the Church demonstrated the impossibility of a spherical Earth, and that Columbus faced theological bigotry. White declared that medieval scholars knew, on the best authority, that the Earth was a flat disk. Both statements are demonstrably false. Draper and White ignored or suppressed the vast body of medieval writing that affirmed the sphere. They cherry-picked a handful of marginal figures, Lactantius, Cosmas Indicopleustes, and presented them as the mainstream, when in fact they were fringe outliers dismissed by their own contemporaries. The effect was devastating. Generations of students read Draper and White as authoritative science history. The image of the flat Earth Middle Ages hardened into received truth. Textbooks repeated it. Cartoons mocked it. Hollywood embraced it. The myth became so pervasive that even historians sometimes forgot to question it. That is how the lie was built. Not by medieval ignorance, but by modern propaganda. The purpose was clear. If you can make the past look stupid, the present looks enlightened. If you can portray the 1,000 years between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance as a pit of superstition, then the modern world seems like a clean break, a triumph of reason. The Flat Earth Middle Ages was a tool for that story. It was a useful insult, and it worked. Now you might be thinking about those medieval maps, the ones that look flat, the Hereford Mappa Mundi, the Ebstorf map. These are often cited as proof that medieval people imagined a flat Earth. They show a circular world with Jerusalem at the center. Oceans ring the landmass. Monsters and wonders populate the edges. They look like flat disks. It seems like a smoking gun, but it is not. And the reason is simple. A Mappa Mundi was not a navigational map. It was a theological diagram. It was a symbolic representation of the known world, the Orbis Terrarum, as part of a larger cosmic story. It showed sacred history, not geography. It placed Jerusalem at the center, not because medieval cartographers thought the Earth was physically flat, but because Jerusalem was the spiritual center of the Christian world. The circular shape echoed the shape of the host, the idea of perfection. The same culture that produced the Hereford Mappa Mundi also produced armillary spheres, precise, three-dimensional models of the heavens and earth. The same century produced the Behaim globe. It is a sphere. It shows the Earth as a globe. It has latitude lines. It was made for merchants and navigators. No one looked at a mappa mundi and thought they were viewing a literal satellite image. They understood the distinction between a symbolic diagram and a physical depiction. To mistake a mappa mundi for a flat Earth document is like finding a medieval painting of Christ in majesty and concluding that medieval people believed the sky was made of gold leaf. The evidence of globes, of spherical diagrams in Sacrobosco's textbooks, of Dante's spherical cosmos, all make the point. Medieval people knew the Earth was round. The maps don't disprove that. They show that medieval thinkers held multiple ways of representing the world simultaneously, the symbolic and the literal, the theological and the geographical. That is not ignorance. That is complexity. And finally, the question that hangs over every discussion like this. What about the ordinary person, the peasant in the field, the farmer who couldn't read? Did she think the Earth was flat? The honest answer is we do not have enough evidence to be certain about every individual's private belief. Literacy was low. Most people did not write treatises on astronomy, but we do have clues. Church art often depicted a spherical creation. The globe of the world appears in illuminated manuscripts, stained glass windows, and altarpieces. Sermons, which reached the illiterate, taught the order of God's creation, which included a round Earth. Mystery plays might have shown a spherical world. What we do not find is any evidence of a flat Earth doctrine being taught to the masses. No bishop told farmers to believe in a flat disk. No council declared the sphere heretical. There is no record of anyone being prosecuted for saying the Earth was round. Not one trial. In 1,000 years. In 1,000 years of church history, with all its quarrels and inquisitions, no one was ever burned for believing in a globe. The absence of that evidence is deafening. The myth demands that the medieval world was a monolithic fortress of flat Earth ignorance. It was not. The official knowledge, from popes to professors, was a sphere. The intellectual framework was spherical. Folk beliefs, whatever else they included, were never codified into dogma. The myth is disproven by what did exist and by what did not. So we arrive at the verdict. The case rests on a mountain of evidence. Aristotle, Eratosthenes, Ptolemy, Bede, Sacrobosco, Aquinas, Dante. Globes in libraries, armillary spheres in classrooms, a university textbook written in 1230 that opens, without argument, "The Earth is a sphere." That book was taught in every university in Europe for centuries. It was never controversial. It was never suppressed. It was never replaced by a flat Earth alternative. The flat Earth Middle Ages did not exist. It was manufactured in the 19th century. It was stitched together from a novelist's imagination and a propagandist's agenda. The definitive scholarly work that exposed this is Jeffrey Burton Russell's 1991 book, Inventing the Flat Earth, Columbus and Modern Historians. Russell traced every link in the chain of fabrication. He showed how the myth was built, who built it, and why. Historians of science have accepted Russell's findings. The conflict thesis is dead in academia. The myth of the flat Earth Middle Ages survives only in popular culture. It survives in memes, in throwaway jokes, in the stories we still tell about Columbus. It survives because it is useful. It makes the past a punchline. But history is not a punchline. It is a record of human beings, just as intelligent as we are, working with the tools they had. The real medieval world was curious, connected, and spoke of spheres. It preserved Greek science, translated Arabic learning, and built the universities that would later nurture Copernicus and Galileo. To slander that world as flat Earth ignorant is not just historically wrong. It is a failure of gratitude, and we have been repeating the lie for 200 years. Now you know who told it: a novelist, 2 propagandists, and a culture that wanted to believe its ancestors were fools. The Earth was never flat. The medieval world never thought it was. The evidence was always there, waiting for someone to look at it honestly. The case is closed.